Russian propagandists are calling for the destruction of Europe. Days without Russian nuclear threats, zero. Radical Kremlin politicians and journalists are the main ideologists of the destruction of the world. According to their view, Europe and the United States want to seize and destroy Russia, so the Kremlin has no other choice but to be the first to destroy the entire western part of the world with nuclear missiles. It is precisely these threats from people close to Putin that have prompted European countries to mobilize and create a unified military force capable of countering Moscow in the event of any aggressive actions. Propagandists have long acquired the reputation of minstrels, radical clowns mired in personal hatred, but from time to time their statements cause serious concern. This was also the case in February 2026, when propagandists once again in unison called for strikes against Europe. We have gathered all the details of what is happening in this video, and now we will tell you about it. So let's get started. On the eve of the negotiations in Geneva between representatives of Russia, Ukraine, and the United States of America, calls for tough measures once again intensified in the Russian public sphere. The plane carrying the Russian delegation landed in Switzerland on Tuesday morning, and at the same time, publications discussing the possibility of strikes on European targets began to appear in the information space. The journal Russia in Global Affairs, whose editorial board includes Russian Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov and assistant to the president of the Russian Federation Yuri Ushakov, published an article by political scientist Sergey Karaganov entitled Mittelspiel and the Strategy for the Day After Tomorrow. The article was published on the eve of a round of negotiations. In his publication, Karaganov stated that, in his opinion, the current stage of the West's war with Russia may be approaching its end. He expressed regret that, in his view, a strategy of active nuclear deterrence had not been implemented earlier. According to him, this is supposedly the only solution to the European problem. The political scientist claims that, in his assessment, Russia is winning, but there has supposedly been no clear response to the actions of the West. The article lists episodes that the author interprets as aggressive actions, the seizure of ships, threats to restrict navigation, attempts at economic blockade, and attacks on infrastructure. At the same time, Karaganov believes that strikes on targets within Ukraine do not solve the strategic objective. He then moves on to what he calls the nuclear argument, suggesting first to demonstrate readiness to use non-nuclear weapons against command centers and infrastructure in European countries, and then, if this yields no results, to consider the possibility of limited use of nuclear weapons. In his article, Sergey Karaganov describes in detail a possible sequence of actions. He asserts that the demonstration of resolve should begin with the use of non-nuclear means against command centers, critical infrastructure, and military bases in European countries, which, in his view, play a key role in supporting military actions against Russia. Among the priority targets, he also names locations where elites gather in the capitals of states, including countries that possess nuclear weapons. The author of this article goes on to write that if such steps do not lead to a change in Europe's position, then, in his opinion, Russia should be prepared to carry out limited but massive strikes with operational strategic nuclear weapons. Karaganov emphasizes the necessity of being fully prepared, both in terms of military technical capabilities and politico-psychological readiness. Before using nuclear means, he suggests carrying out several salvos with operational tactical missiles in their non-nuclear configuration. Separately, the publication expresses the necessity of depriving France and the United Kingdom of access to nuclear weapons. These statements were made against the backdrop of diplomatic efforts and became one of the most discussed elements of the information agenda during the days of negotiations. It is worth noting that Karaganov has made similar proposals more than once before. In June 2023, in a column for the magazine Profil, he had already called for a preemptive nuclear strike on Europe. In 2024, he served as the moderator of the plenary session at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, with Putin in attendance. During the discussion, he repeatedly raised the topic of the possible use of nuclear weapons. Later, Karaganov repeated similar points in interviews with various publications and in a conversation with Tucker Carlson. At the same time as Karaganov's publication, other statements also appeared in the information space. Kremlin philosopher Alexander Dugin expressed disappointment that, according to him, many Russians are not ready for mobilization. He stated that a serious shakeup is needed, one that could motivate millions of people to go to the front. And Karaganov, accordingly, says that there are two possible scenarios for how the situation could develop. The first is an extremely tough total mobilization involving the conscription of several million people in a short period of time. He presented this idea to Putin and asked him to consider such an option. The second scenario, which Dugin spoke about, involves the emergence of a situation that, in his opinion, will force society to realize the necessity of war. He suggested that devastating missile strikes on Moscow, including possible damage to the Kremlin, historic buildings, and residential neighborhoods, could change public sentiment. According to him, such events could become a factor for mobilization. Earlier, Dugin had already stated that strikes on major Russian cities, including Moscow and St. Petersburg, could motivate the population to participate in military actions. Last summer, he warned about possible strikes on Sochi and other seaside resorts. These predictions have been partially confirmed, however, as observers note, they did not lead to the announcement of total mobilization. It is also reported that the Kremlin was unpleasantly surprised by such statements. Sources in Russian propaganda media noted that the authorities do not share all of the philosopher's statements and expect greater caution in his wording. It should also be noted that on February 19th, Alexander Dugin also commented on the possible transfer of nuclear weapons to Ukraine. On social media, he suggested that the US and the UK might take actions aimed at transferring nuclear capabilities to Kyiv. According to him, the situation is being closely monitored and remains under control. These statements were made against the backdrop of a general escalation in rhetoric surrounding the issue of strategic weapons. To understand the context of such remarks, it is necessary to turn to the history of nuclear weapons development in Russia. It begins during the period of the Soviet Union's existence. After the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945, the Soviet leadership decided to accelerate the development of its own nuclear project. On August 29, 1949, the first Soviet atomic device, RDS-1, was successfully tested at the Semipalatinsk test site. Thus, the USSR became the second nuclear power in the world. Intelligence data about the Manhattan Project played a significant role in accelerating the program. In the 1950s and 1960s, the Soviet Union actively developed both atomic and thermonuclear charges. In 1953, the first Soviet hydrogen bomb was tested, and in 1961, the ultra-powerful Tsar Bomba. This is the most powerful nuclear device in history. At the same time, delivery systems were being improved. Intercontinental ballistic missiles, strategic aviation, and submarines equipped with ballistic missiles. After the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, Russia became the successor to the Soviet nuclear arsenal. The nuclear weapons that were located on the territory of Ukraine, Belarus, and Kazakhstan were withdrawn and transferred under Moscow's control by the mid-1990s. Since then, Russia has maintained its status as one of the largest nuclear powers alongside the United States of America. Russia's modern nuclear capabilities are based on the concept of the nuclear triad. The first component is land-based intercontinental ballistic missiles, including the Topol-M and RS-24 Yars systems, which are deployed both in silos and on mobile launchers. The naval component consists of Borei-class nuclear-powered strategic submarines armed with Bulava missiles. And the third component is strategic aviation, including the Tu-95MS and Tu-160 bombers, which are capable of carrying cruise missiles with nuclear warheads. In addition to its strategic forces, Russia possesses an arsenal of lower-yield tactical nuclear weapons intended for use in combat zones. According to international estimates, Russia's total nuclear arsenal numbers several thousand warheads, some of which are on active duty, while others are in reserve or storage. In recent years, Russian authorities have announced the development of new strategic systems, including hypersonic complexes and advanced delivery vehicles, which are claimed to be capable of overcoming existing anti-ship defense systems. These projects are positioned as an element of strategic deterrence. That's all for today. Thank you for being with us. Be sure to like this video and write in the comments below what you think about everything that was discussed. Take care of yourselves and see you in the next broadcasts.